Pokemon facts are really fun, and they're especially fun when you come across the kind of facts that are more obscure and not talked about as much. So in this video, I am going to be covering some facts that I have hunted down after looking around for the most interesting and lesser known facts that I could find. So let's get into it. In Pokemon Black and White, Cedric Juniper has a secret piece of dialogue hidden in the games that is impossible to see in normal gameplay. When you first meet him in Mistralton City, he will make a comment about how you've seen a Clink, but there's actually dialogue in the games that he can say in the event that you haven't seen a Clink. If you haven't come across one yet, he will say, "You haven't seen a Clink yet?" However, this dialogue is impossible to access in-game since it is impossible to not have seen a Clink at this point, due to N using one in one of the required battles with him. With that said though, it's still pretty cool that they accounted for this possibility. Hidden dialogue is always a great source for obscure facts like this, and some more hidden dialogue can be found in Generation 2. If you tune your radio to the Lucky channel and then just leave it playing for a while, the DJ will eventually say, "Repeating myself gets to be a drag," which is a pretty fun little detail. Speaking of Gen 2, it's hard to talk about obscure facts from this generation and not mention its cut content, since it is currently the greatest source of cut content in the entire series. In a previous video, I mentioned how there was initially plans for a location in Gold and Silver called the Haunted House that would later be used in Gen 4 with the old chateau. But there were some extremely interesting details about this that I didn't mention at the time when I previously brought this up. For example, the house was planned to be right here on Route 26, as you're making your way to the Pokemon League. It would have been in the place where the house of the Day of the Week siblings appears in the final games, which ended up being a bit of a downgrade if you ask me, and what's even cooler is that we even have some maps for it. While they are early maps that ultimately went unfinished, they show what the house was planned to look like on the inside, and that it was planned to have 2 floors, a basement, and even an attic, which is especially spooky and cool, and it's really interesting to imagine what Game Freak might have initially had in store for this location before it was cut. Now this next thing is insane because it's insanely cute, and that would be the plushies on my merch store. There's my mascot Fulkachi from my Histrobi Chronicles game, who's super adorable, and then there's one of my fan favorite Fakemon, Narwade, and I mean, do I even need to say anymore? I mean, look, he's spherical! Spherical! These guys are soft, squishy, adorable, and you can pick one up right now with the link in the description. If you grab Fulkachi, you even get a limited edition promo card with it too, and this thing is super clean. Not to mention, grabbing one of these little guys immensely supports my ability to make content for you guys and continue all of the cool projects I've got going on. Plus, it also allows plushies of these cute little guys to exist and to continue to exist in the future as well, so what's not to love? Be sure to check them out and pick one up with the link in the description, and thank you all so much for watching. If you thought a haunted house would have been cool though, that is nothing compared to this next fact. Courtesy of cut content website, The Cutting Room Floor, there was initially going to be a secret adult room that would have been accessible in Pokemon Gold and Silver. It was planned to lie beneath the game corner in Celadon City where Team Rocket's hideout once was, and when the data for this room is reassembled, it seems to resemble a bar, complete with an NPC behind the counter and multiple apparent customers at the tables. Now, as if this room resembling a bar wasn't enough, the adult theme of this room seems to be confirmed thanks to an item that was also cut from the games, known as Proof of Adulthood, and it even came with a description that reads, "Just holding it makes you feel more like an adult." So, putting 2 and 2 together, it seems like this item is what would have granted you access to this secret bar beneath the game corner in Celadon City. And while what you would have been able to find there is anybody's guess, it was likely cut due to it being a little too risque, because if they were already having problems with the game corners in general, a secret adults-only bar beneath the game corner was probably not going to go over too well. So as interesting as this is, it also makes sense that it was cut. And while we're on the topic of Johto, one neat yet literally very small detail comes from the Johto remakes Heart Gold and Soul Silver. When viewing the map via the Pokegear, Ethan's icon will be displayed much as you'd expect, but when viewing the map from the Pokedex, when viewing the habitat of a Pokemon for example, Ethan's icon is a little different, as his hat actually sports its design from Generation 2, while the icon from the Pokegear map uses the updated design that was introduced in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Jumping ahead a few generations, the Alola region was introduced in Pokemon Sun and Moon in 2016, but the region, or at least its name, was actually around long before this. In Dragon Quest V, there is a monster in the game called a Hooligan, which is obviously Hawaiian themed, just like the Alola region, and you actually have the ability to recruit this monster to your team. When you do, it's possible to name the monster, similar to nicknames in Pokemon, and one of the default names for this monster is actually Alola. I find this very interesting for a few reasons. Number one, Dragon Quest V came out well before Pokemon Sun and Moon. It first made its way to North America in 2009, and initially came out in Japan in 1992, which was before Pokemon as a series had even come out itself. The other reason I find this interesting is because Alola is obviously a more custom name, and Sun and Moon's director, Shigeru Omori, even described the process of coming up with the name in an interview, even though it had already existed for this Dragon Quest monster well before the Alola region had existed at all. Lastly, this is also pretty interesting considering Pokemon's ties to Dragon Quest, as Dragon Quest was actually a major inspiration for Pokemon, even going so far as to being the inspiration for the concept of trading, which is integral to the series. So with that in mind, it kinda makes you wonder whether Game Freak were aware of this name for this Dragon Quest creature when they were working on Sun and Moon, and whether this is just a coincidence or possibly an obscure tip of the cap to Dragon Quest, a series that helped to inspire Pokemon's creation, especially since Sun and Moon released during Pokemon's 20th anniversary when the series was already doing a lot of looking back on its early days. Whatever the case may be though, this is a pretty neat little connection regardless. Another cool fact about Sun and Moon is that if you talk to Morimoto in the Game Freak offices in Heihei City, while you have certain Pokemon in your party that were transferred in from the Virtual Console Red, Blue, and Yellow, he will give you special facts about them. He does this when you have a Mankey, Executor, Tauros, Diglett, or Mew in your party, but my personal favorite of these would have to be Diglett, because he mentions how Diglett is basically just a character that he had made up when he was a kid, which is pretty crazy, and in a way, kinda helps to explain its unique design and how it never comes out of the ground. In Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, when battling your rival Nemona, the camera is always positioned to be looking up at her. It's really easy to not think anything of this, but this is a technique that is commonly used to portray someone in a position of power, or someone that the audience is supposed to look up to. This connects to Nemona because Nemona is already a champion level trainer, so the player naturally does look up to her as a result. However, the really cool part about this is that in the champion battle against her, after defeating Geeta, the camera now becomes eye level with Nemona instead, which symbolizes how you are now on her level, which is an amazing attention to detail by the developers. Now, this next one can't be outright confirmed as a fact, but it's still pretty interesting. The character Benny from Legends Arceus is an ancestor of Wally from Ruby and Sapphire, and this becomes evident when Benny removes his disguise to reveal his ninja-like attire. This particular design of Benny could have potentially been inspired by the Pokémon Adventures manga, as it heavily resembles Wally, who is Benny's descendant, when he is wearing his respirator suit in the manga. Given how referential Legends Arceus is to other pieces of Pokémon media, I would not be surprised if this was in fact the case, which is really cool. And speaking of Ruby and Sapphire, another cool detail can be found in these games' remakes, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. During the Delta episode, a meteor shower known as the Litleonids are mentioned, which are based on an actual meteor shower known as the Leonids. The connections go a little deeper though, because the Leonids are an annual meteor shower that take place in November, which is exactly when Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire were released. And the player's mom also mentions that they last occurred 11 or 12 years ago, depending on which language version of the game you are playing. And this is in reference to the amount of time between the release of Ruby and Sapphire and the remakes. This might go even deeper than that though, because if this meteor shower happens every 11 years, and that represents the time between the original games and the remakes, then 11 years after Oraz's release in 2014 would be 2025, which is when Pokémon Legends ZA is going to come out. And while that game is based in Kalos, it will have a lot to do with Mega Evolution, which Oraz obviously plays a big part in, and Rayquaza in particular is at the center of, who the Delta episode is all about. So it's possible that the Litleonids could actually be coming back again after another 11 years in Pokémon Legends ZA, which would be absolutely insane if it were to happen. We've talked about Gen 2 a good bit in this video, and as I mentioned earlier, Gen 2 is infamous for its treasure trove of cut content, which naturally includes a lot of cut Pokémon. There were a lot of Pokémon planned for this generation that didn't make the final cut, but they did actually get to live on in another way. Some of these cut Pokémon had their spots taken in the Pokédex by Pokémon that did make the final games, like, for example, Lantern taking the spot of Subomito, the scrapped Weepinbell branched evolution. While these Pokémon were replaced, they would still end up finding a way to be present in the final product, as I just said, as these Pokémon's shiny colors actually became the shinies of the Pokémon who took over their spot in the Pokédex, as you can see with Shiny Lantern, who uses the same color palette as Shiny Subomito. You can also see this with other Pokemon as well, like Wooper, who took the place of the cut Farfetch'd evolution, and Forretress, who took the place of Pinsir's cut evolution. And on that note, I actually have one more that I literally just realized while writing the script for this video that I had to squeeze in here because it actually blew my mind. So it's well known that Pinsir and Scyther were basically counterparts to each other back in Gen 1 before they kinda went their separate ways with their evolutions. And while you can see this in the fact that they're both big bug types that were unevolved in Generation 1 and also sat pretty close to each other in the Pokédex, there's actually one other detail that ties them together this way. This seems to be limited to the English versions of the games from what I can see, but it seems like Pinsir and Scyther were actually imagined as male and female counterparts of each other, as Pinsir has Sir in its name, denoting it as male, and Scyther has the word her in its name, denoting it as a female. Like I said, I think this might have just been the English localizer's way of connecting these two Pokemon together, because it doesn't seem like this was the case for their Japanese names, and also gender obviously wasn't a thing yet in Generation 1, but it does seem like this was an intentional play on words that was designed to tie these two Pokemon together as counterparts, which is honestly insane because I have never noticed this until now or heard anyone else mention it at all. On that note though, be sure to let me know which of these facts you enjoyed the most, and leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed, because it really helps out and helps me to keep making videos for you guys. With that said, I'll see you soon with another video, and until then, as always, thanks so much for watching this one, I really appreciate it, and I will smell you guys later.